The Magnificent Battle, Merlin, Arthur's Court, and the Mistress of Time, by the Magus, read by the Magus. Chapter 39, Preparations for the Banquet. Merlin was no newcomer to the Great Hall. In fact, Merlin was no newcomer to much of anything. One could simply look at him and tell that he had been around for more than a while. The kids wondered how old he was, but were afraid or too polite to ask. Merlin had acquired knowledge and skills over time he would put to use tonight. First off, we must take ourselves to Lady Elaine's dress shop. Oh my gosh, Damon thought to himself. I've gone back through time to be bored to death. Don't be so sure, Merlin snapped. Damon was not pleased that Merlin knew what he was thinking. He tried to rationalize that Merlin didn't know what he was thinking, just what boys of his type and of his age typically would think about a dress shop, surely the most boring place in the world for a boy his age. Still, it was disconcerting. Somewhere in the late afternoon, Merlin, followed by 5 young 21st-century youth, attractively clad in 6th-century clothes, knocked on a heavy door in a thick rock wall. A face peered through a small window in the door. "It's Merlin!" exclaimed an excited voice. "Let him in!" came another. The door opened, and Merlin and the kids found themselves in a beautiful garden with a pathway that led to another door in a relatively large building. Soon came a tall, lovely lady in flowing robes, who greeted them graciously. "Merlin, it is such a pleasure. I have been looking for you." Noticing the kids with him, she asked, "And what do you have here?" "Ah, my Lady Elaine, it is wonderful to see you again," he said as he kissed her outstretched hand. Then, turning to the kids, "These young ones are to be presented at the Great Hall tonight. We need a bit of, assistance." The Lady Elaine paused. Here was Merlin, whom she had last seen when he returned from the voyage. Then there were 5 of the strangest, yet fairest young people she had ever seen. Merlin noticed her hesitation as connections were made in her head, but then Merlin noticed most everything. "Please come in," she said as she took Asher and Krista by the hand and walked them into the first room. The boys could not help noticing several lovely young girls who were about their age, who were scurrying about in the background. Reluctantly, they followed Asher and Krista inside. Lady Elaine's shop is the place where royalty, both human and fairy, come for their dressing needs, Merlin said, mostly to Asher and Krista. "These young ladies are apprentices. The lady is trying to teach these young women some skills that can give them some independence and freedom in their lives. They are learning to be tailors and dressmakers. The plight of women in our time is not good. The goal is that they will start their own shops and have some control over their lives." Krista and Asher could see 4 or 5 young girls who were now emerging from the next room. The apprentices seemed especially interested in looking at Mikhail, Damon, and Fergus, and covered giggles with their hands. The boys, who could hear them whispering and saw them pointing, especially at their tight deerskin pants, blushed with embarrassment. Fergus became quite self-conscious about his knees. Merlin and the Lady Elaine conferred for a moment. Fergus heard her say something about Great Mother, and thought he heard Merlin say something about Great Voyage, but he couldn't hear any more. Then, turning from Merlin, the lady gave orders that the attendants were to spare neither effort nor cost to dress them so as to be nothing less than stunningly attired. The boys watched as Krista and Asher hustled off into the dressing rooms. The attendants jumped to the task with glee, giggles, and exclamations, delighted to have the opportunity to show their finest work. The boys could hear them behind curtains, laughing, fussing over options, experimenting with various colors, until finally fitting the girls in the finest shifts and embroidered dresses with richly colored flowers and birds, all to be worn beneath the jeweled robes Merlin had found for them, open in the front to create a rainbow of color as they moved through the hall, and topped with beautiful fur vests. Asher and Krista tried to protest the furs, but were soon made to understand by Merlin, listening through the curtain, that in a time of limited resources and extremes of cold, furs were more than decorative. They were essential. Reluctantly, they consented. When the tailors were satisfied with their clothing, they began weaving white flowers, jeweled ribbons, and leafy sprigs into the girls' hair, so that when they arrived at Camelot, they would not only be wearing regular head coverings of the other ladies, but unique head coverings of nature's finest and most beautiful gifts. They called it the fairy's hat. As a final touch, the assistants placed sparkling tiaras on their heads, weaving flowers, ribbons, and hair through the tiaras that curled gracefully down over their shoulders to complement the colored reflections of light from the shimmering stones' sparkle. Both girls were, well, how do we say? They would say, passing fair. We would say, stunning. Merlin and the lady excused themselves from the boys for a few minutes. When they were alone, the Lady Elaine said, "I have been searching for you since you left. The council has been concerned for you since your voyage. I think gathering this group was not easy." "Not at all," Merlin responded. "Their disrupted arrival meant that there was much ground to cover to collect them. I found them just in time, and yes, I did feel weakened by the voyage through time, but I am well now." "Thanks be to the Great Mother," came the reply from the lady. "Are you more certain that these are the ones we are looking for?" she asked. "You were told to look to Cassiopeia. There are 5 stars. There are 5 future magi. You were told to look to the future. They come from the future. The far future," he replied. "So you are sure that they are the ones spoken of in the prophecy?" she asked. "It appears so, and we must help them all we can," he replied. "How can we do that?" she asked. "Right now, we prepare them for the feast at the Great Hall. I have other plans for them there." Merlin would have shared more, but as it was the afternoon of the great banquet, there was more business for the lady's shop. "I trust your plans. You may share more with me later." She and Merlin went back to the boys. Asher and Krista came in and modeled their attire for Merlin and the lady, who inspected them as the boys enjoyed tea and sweet bread, while the assistants continued making finishing touches with the girls. Asher and Krista were almost perilously fair. The lady looked at them and smiled. "Nothing less than beautiful," she said with satisfaction. "Do I see fairy handiwork in the head covering?" she asked. "Yes, my lady," replied one of the older attendants. "She always has the best ideas for the greatest beauty." With that, she pointed to a very diminutive young girl seated in a corner, almost obscured by the darkness. "Come, Bren," said the owner. "Let Merlin have a look at you." The girl, a girl of exceptional beauty, almost seemed to float from the darkness and spoke to Merlin. "My lord." "Bren, my child, the blessings of the Great Mother." Bren nodded and bowed as gracefully as a ballerina. "And in you her abundance," came her melodious reply. Motioning to another, the lady said, "You also remember Gwendolyn, don't you?" "Of course," Merlin said, turning to Gwendolyn, "and you too are as fair as a flower." Gwendolyn bowed as well, with the same grace as the first. As to Bren, the artistry and fairy skills of her fairy mother are strong in her, the lady said. "Yes, as are her beauty and grace. Surely one of her fairy kind will come for her some day, and she will leave you," Merlin said to the lady. "She did not inherit her mother's immortality. Still, she may have a fairy wedding, unless she chooses a human for a husband, but finding a human worthy of her seems unlikely," she replied. "And Gwendolyn is far too fair and clever to be hidden in your workshop for long," Merlin chided the lady. "Yes, but for now I try to keep her out of sight of men. She is a jewel, and so talented," replied Lady Elaine. The boys, not accustomed to pay attention to such things, were amazed. Their first amazement was at the beauty of Asher and Krista. "Wow," Mikhail said as he looked at them. "I never knew." Even Damon had to compliment Krista. "Hey, little sis, looks like it's a good thing that we've been taking taekwondo. We're going to need it to keep the boys away." Krista rolled her eyes. Fergus could do nothing but stand and stare, mouth slightly agape. Then there was Bren. She moved as gracefully as a bird in flight, and was as radiantly beautiful as any girl they had ever seen. When they looked at Gwendolyn, they were amazed by her beauty as well. When they had overcome their shock, Krista asked Merlin, "When you were talking about that girl over there," pointing to Bren, "you said her fairy mother. What did you mean?" "Exactly what I said," Merlin answered. "Her mother is a fairy and her father is a human. She is living here for the time being to learn the ways of men before probably going back to live her life in the fairy community." "Ugh," Fergus grunted. "Fairies. Now I've seen it all." "Oh, no," Brenly responded. "Would that it were so. There is so much more to see." Fergus sat down again, wrapped his hands around the walking stick, closed his eyes, and muttered to himself. "Hey, if her mother was a fairy and her father was a human, does that mean she's a changeling?" Asher asked. "No, simply because she wasn't exchanged. She is here for a reason," the lady answered. "She sure isn't like the last changelings we saw," Asher said. "Just one more thing. Their mothers, that is, Krista and Asher's mothers, would have been dismayed to hear their beautiful daughters being praised for their beauty. They would have protested that their daughters were more than just beautiful, would have protested that they were not being recognized for their intelligence and their creativity and all of that 21st century stuff, all of which would have been true. But the 21st century had not come yet. For the time being, somewhere in the far-off 6th century, they were simply beautiful, or in the words of the French book, passing fair.